Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating analysis by the renowned scholar Javed Ahmad Ghamidi. I was honestly really struck by how this analysis approaches a deeply complex, everyday issue. How exactly do we navigate the modern financial system without compromising traditional religious values? It's a topic that sits right at the intersection of ancient theology and modern macroeconomics, and unpacking these insights is definitely going to challenge how you think about your everyday banking. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to map this out across 5 key areas. First, the modern inflation dilemma. Then, we'll look at why interest is forbidden, compare inflation adjustment to interest, discuss the helpless individual, and finally, dive into reforming banks and scholars. Let's just jump right in. Kicking things off with Part 1, the modern inflation dilemma. According to Ghamidi's analysis, we really need to look at the human cost of this first. Imagine a helpless individual, say a widow or retiree, who's holding on to their life savings. Because they hold deep religious beliefs that bank interest is forbidden, they absolutely refuse to put their money into an interest-bearing account. But as a direct result, they're forced to just sit there and helplessly watch the purchasing power of their money completely vanish. I mean, what is the alternative for someone who doesn't understand the incredibly complex global financial system? To put this into perspective, Ghamidi points out a truly staggering reality. He notes that over a recent 5-year period, a local currency dropped to less than a third of its value against the US dollar. Literally, less than a third. If you'd saved up just enough to survive your retirement, and suddenly that money is worth a fraction of what it was, you are left in absolute financial ruin. This isn't just some theoretical economic shift, right? It's a life-altering disaster for everyday people who are just trying to do the right thing. Which brings us to Part 2, why exactly is interest forbidden? To understand the tension here and why people are so incredibly hesitant to protect their money through traditional banking, we have to take a step back. We need to neutrally examine the theological root of why interest, or sood, is banned in the first place. Well, it all boils down to a concept called infaq. In this framework, if you have surplus wealth, money beyond your personal, business, or future needs, and someone comes to you asking for help, giving them that money is a profound act of charity. Islam views this as fulfilling a fundamental right of the deprived. It is absolutely not viewed as a business opportunity. And honestly, that can feel pretty foreign to our modern capitalist sensibilities. And this comparison right here brilliantly hits the nail on the head regarding the core conflict. Islam views loans as a secondary extension of that charity. If you can't afford to just give the money away, you loan it. But demanding a profit on a loan, that's seen as morally corrupt, basically akin to exploiting charitable funds to run a side hustle. On the flip side, look at the modern world. We've transformed lending into a massive global corporate business. The modern bank is built entirely on the premise that lending is a profit-generating service. All right, moving right along to Part 3, inflation adjustment versus interest. So the crucial question is, how on earth do we bridge this massive gap? How do you keep a loan charitable and strictly ethical while surviving extreme, historically unprecedented inflation? Well, Ghamidi explains a really practical solution that's actually gaining a lot of traction among scholars globally. First, we have to acknowledge that the sheer scale of modern inflation is historically totally new. Centuries ago, prices could remain stable for literally 300 years. Today, that's unimaginable. Second, we use scientific methods to calculate the exact inflation rate. And third, we adjust the principal amount to retain its original purchasing power. Ghamidi argues that simply adjusting a sum to match inflation isn't interest at all. It's merely a fair preservation of the money's true original value. And to ensure this is done fairly and honestly and doesn't secretly just turn into a profit-making scheme, we can use concrete scientific metrics. You could index the loan to commodities, peg it to a major stable currency like the US dollar, or use a standard basket of consumer goods to calculate the exact loss of purchasing power. This way, the lender doesn't lose a massive chunk of their wealth, and the borrower isn't being exploited for profit. It's a really pragmatic middle ground.
Let's shift gears to Part 4, the helpless individual. Let's bring this back down to ground level for a second. What actually happens to the everyday person who is trapped in an imperfect banking system right now, while all these high-level macroeconomic theories are still being debated? For a vulnerable retiree or an uninformed citizen with no other viable options, the system is absolutely terrifying. But Ghamidi offers a deeply compassionate view here. If an individual has to navigate this flawed banking system out of pure necessity, sheer helplessness, and honest intentions, they are not the ones who will face divine punishment. They will find divine mercy. The burden of a broken system doesn't fall entirely on the helpless victim just trying to survive.
He also notes that, historically speaking, Islam has always relied on a timeline of gradual education rather than abrupt, blanket condemnations. For example, he mentions how early Islam slowly reformed pre-Islamic marriage customs over time, rather than just instantly criminalizing entire communities overnight. Issuing blanket fatwas, sweeping religious decrees saying everyone using a bank is sinning, totally ignores the reality that people are forced to operate within a global financial system. We have to acknowledge reality, educate the public, and move toward gradual reform. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Reforming Banks and Scholars. So if the principles are actually quite logical and the path for individuals is clear, we have to ask the big question: what is actually stopping us from reforming the entire macroeconomic system right now? According to the source, systemic reform is completely stalled by two incredibly stubborn groups. On one side, we have modern bankers. The reality is, banks today are mostly doing financing or hire purchase, not traditional lending. Yet they flat out refuse to change their jargon or print new documents simply out of habit. And on the other side, traditional ulema or scholars who are stuck in 700-year-old fiqh or jurisprudence. They completely refuse to revise outdated business structures to match modern realities. Both sides are just entirely entrenched in their own traditions. And listen, this rigidity, it isn't just an academic debate. It actively enables real-world disasters. Ghamidi brings up a tragic example from the 60s and 70s. Expats returning home would invest 10 to 50 lakh into local businesses as sleeping partners. Because archaic, 700-year-old fiqh dictates a sleeping partner must universally share in business losses, scammers would simply declare a loss, legally wiping out the expat's entire life savings. The traditional scholars refused to revise this rule, completely enabling massive financial exploitation. Ghamidi delivers a really sharp critique here that brilliantly summarizes the frustration of the whole situation. He argues that the actual mechanical fix, like changing the banking terminology from loans to financing and updating ancient business jurisprudence to protect modern investors, is incredibly simple. It would literally take just 2 hours of work to outline. But human stubbornness, getting people to abandon their beloved jargon and traditions, that is the real mountain to climb, and unfortunately, it takes a century. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought based on everything we've covered today. We have the scientific tools to protect savings fairly. We know exactly what administrative changes are needed to align modern banking with ethical charity. So are we finally ready to break free from rigid traditions, outdated jargon, and stubborn institutional pride to create a financial system that truly serves and protects humanity? It's a massive question posed by this analysis, and definitely one that should keep us all questioning the systems around us.